And good morning. It is 25 to 11. This is Hugo Rifkind on Times Radio. Now, after a period of some stasis or equilibrium, the world order is changing rapidly due in large part to Donald Trump. He calls it Liberation Day. To others, it's World Tariff Day. The president is getting ready to ramp up a global trade war. So how are diplomats who are supposed to represent a government's interests supposed to deal with global instability? Well, João Vale de Almeida has a 40-year international career. He was the first European Union ambassador to the UK and the United States, as well as the EU's man in the United Nations. He's met most of the world's leaders, including Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And he's written a tell-all book called The Divorce of Nations about his 40-year career. João, welcome to Times Radio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for being here. First up, what do you make of Europe's response to Donald Trump and his tariffs? Is Britain right to do everything it can to avoid a trade war, even if it makes us look a bit supine, a bit deferential?
I think we should all avoid a trade war. I mean, this is the wrong thing to do at the wrong time. I mean, the president calls it a Liberation Day. I would call it a divorce day, in line with the title of my book. This is not good for anybody, right? So in my view, it's not good for the American consumers or the American economy. Certainly not good for Europeans, including our British friends. So I think we should all do our utmost to avoid it. But if that's what the president wants, I think we will all have to respond appropriately.
I mean, you think we'll have to respond by standing strong, by reciprocating, or by giving in?
No, I think we have to respond in a smart way. Right? I mean, when you talk about retaliation, as much as when you talk about sanctions, it's always a two-way street. Mm-hmm. It hurts you. It hurts your consumers, your economy. So we have to be careful not to hurt us more than we hurt President Trump or his agenda. So it has to be a smart response. What we're trying to do at the European Union is to go for a smart one, and I hope that will be the case. I understand that the UK is trying very hard to make a deal, to find a way to accommodate some of Mr. Trump's concerns, and by doing that, preventing too harsh an impact here. And that is understandable as well. There is another dimension of that needs to be, looked at, because whatever you do with the US will have an impact on whatever you could do in terms of reset with the European Union, which is also an important agenda.
I mean, Europe has long struggled, the European Union itself as well has long struggled to speak with a single voice. Yep. This is obviously the case with Britain that decided not to be part of that voice anymore. But the EU has struggled too. Is there a sense in which Donald Trump has been kind of the wake-up call that Europe needed?
In a way, yes. The history of countries, and certainly the one of the European Union, is made also of reaction to external factors, right? And you have several elements of that in our history. So my benign interpretation of what we're having these days is that it could be a wake-up call in terms of competitiveness of our economy, but also in terms of defense and security, because there's a lot going on, as you know, because of Mr. Trump's relationship with Mr. Putin and his approach to the Ukraine war. This has meant that Europe needs to sort of get its act together in terms of defense and security. So both on the economic side, about competitiveness and being, capable of winning other markets, but also resisting this kind of pressure, but also on the security front, I think that's the benign version of it. The less benign is one that leads us to a global recession, leads us to a global insecurity. And in my book, I try to trace all this back in the last 25 years and see what kind of trends and kind of events and personalities play the role to make what we have today, which is a very troubling situation.
Well, I mean, in that vein, tell me about your first meeting with Donald Trump.
Well, I met him at the UN. I was ambassador to the UN because I had been ambassador to the US, but with President Obama. And it was a big change. I mean, I was used to dealing with Democrats, with Samantha Power at the UN, and then came Nikki Haley, was now not in very good terms with President Trump, but at the time they were in sync, and they brought a very different agenda to the global scene, quite disturbing, quite disruptive. My point is that now I think it looks even worse. Compared to the first term, and we should be very attentive to that. But it's someone that, plays with a different set of, I would say, principles and even rules. Is very unpredictable. He plays the tough guy, and he puts, if you know something about real estate, we all do. somehow.
Yeah.
Real estate tactics are about that. You just put a very high price on top of it at the beginning, and the whole issue is how much do you come down from it. So I'm oversimplifying here, of course, but there's a bit of that. We need to understand Trump's personality.
Was he hostile?
He is at the beginning, yes, but then you have to be smart enough to find, what is really interested in, what is his final sort of end game, and how we can come to that. So you need to stay cool. You never react to the same level of, let's say, provocation. You need to stay focused on what really counts for you, and then be able to compromise. But so it's not an easy partner to have.
You also, of course, met Obama beforehand. How did those interactions differ? Was Obama easier to deal with, or was he just more subtle in pursuing his agendas?
He's a very rational person. He's a very cultivated person. He's very bright, and he can, he can easily win a discussion, but it's a totally different level from Mr. Trump. There's no possible comparison, but I would say rationality is what drives Barack Obama. We had very good cooperation with him, but at the same time, I went to the US when Obama started the pivot to Asia, right? Mm-hmm. So my job was to try to bring him back a little bit to Europe. So you see some elements of the US in recent times, but even historically, trying to isolate itself a little bit from the rest of the world. Isolationism is a very important trend in American politics, and it is interpreted in different ways. This interpretation by Trump adds an element of protectionism, economic nationalism, which I think, again, is very dangerous for the world. That's why I said if he goes ahead with the kind of threats that you've been talking about, today will be a sad day for the international community. So I call it a divorce day.
Well, we'll move on to those big themes in just a moment. First, I want to ask about one other person who is obviously Vladimir Putin, who you've met 15 times, and he's now seen in the West, particularly, in many places, as this sort of bogeyman almost. What was he like in person?
Well, I met him around 15 times in different formations, let's put it this way. A few meetings in a very restricted format, and I talk about it in the book a little bit. I mean, it's a very impressive personality to begin with. Physically, you look at his eyes, you get a sense of, you think of a former KGB officer, really. Yeah. I mean, you cannot forget about that, talking to him. But then he's extremely focused, extremely controlled in his discourse, and he can be very aggressive. And it can be very cynical as well. It can be very dismissive. So you need to, go into a meeting with him equipped with all your, coolness, strength, and resilience if we want to take something out of the meeting. But I met him mainly a few years ago. So if I look at today's Putin, I see an evolution in the wrong direction. It seems to be a quite darker personality.
And would you say that's a personal evolution or a political evolution? I mean,
I think both. I think both. Personally, certainly. But, I mean, if you look back at these 25 years, which are the subject of the book, and you look at the year 2000, who was in power in the year 2000? Of the relevant leaders, only Vladimir Putin.
Sure.
Only Vladimir Putin. So that tells you a lot about the influence he has had throughout this period.
So in terms of the big arc we're talking about here, the roots of what we see, I mean, today is a great day to be talking about this, but the roots of American estrangement from Europe, of America needing to come to accommodation with Russia, of America increasingly worrying about the Far East rather than, I suppose, the Near East. Yeah. Would you say that the seeds of all that have been there throughout your career? Were there decades ago?
Yeah, I think so, in different ways and different degrees of intensity, but things were there. America considers itself an exceptional country, right? But at the same time, one that feels quite protected by, two huge oceans, huge military power, soft power, friendly neighbors, the north and the south. So there's nothing really there that they think is a threat, unless they are attacked. And that's what happened in 9/11 in downtown New York. That's what happened in Pearl Harbor, and they reacted as we know. But otherwise, they tend to, introspect a little bit. And their concern now is China for some time. And Mr. Trump's main concern is China, in terms of power, big power rivalry in the world, economically as well. And so that's always in the back of his mind. And the second aspect that I see, some people in America think that the world should be governed by the big guys, by the big countries, by the big powers. And if I interpret well Mr. Trump, for him it's America, Russia, and China. And Europe, for him, he doesn't like Europe, let's be very frank. I'm not saying about Britain, but that's your issue.
That's
as far as the EU is concerned,
Yeah.
I know he doesn't like us for different reasons, and that's fair enough. But he rather sees the world as the big guys talking among them,
Sure.
and the strong man, the idea of strong man that is there. So Mr. Putin is a strong man in the eyes of Donald Trump, and so is Xi Jinping. So this is very much there. But the other thing that I, try to talk about in the book is the divorce within nations and the issue of populism and how,
Which discredits the role of the diplomat, presumably.
Yeah, of course, because they tend to have a very simplistic discourse. They don't like compromises, negotiations, and they tend to sort of reflect in the domestic political scene what we are talking about here, right? In terms of the global affairs. So you have a divorce among nations. Today's announcement will be part of that, and you have a divorce within nations where there's increased fragmentation, polarization in our political discussion. So this is where we are now in the world, and it's not an easy context.
Well, look, there's so much more I'd like to ask you about if only we had a bit more time. People are just going to have to read the book. Instead, it is called The Divorce of Nations, a diplomat's inside view as the global order collapses. It's out tomorrow. João Vale de Almeida, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you with me.